Hi there, everyone. This is Leah Hines. I'm the Assistant Director for the Charleston Conference, and welcome to the Charleston Conference Hyde Park Debate Webinar. Glad that you guys could join us today. The debate is organized and moderated by Rick Anderson. He's done a lot of work leading up to this event. He picked the topic, found just the right people to debate this topic, and kept us all on track with the Oxford rules. So thank you very much, Rick. We appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.
Rick Anderson. Oh, yeah. Rick is the Associate Dean for Scholarly Resources and Collections in the J. Willard Marriott Library at the University of Utah. He earned his BS and MLIS degrees at Brigham Young University and has worked previously as a bibliographer for YBP, as head acquisitions librarian for the University of North Carolina, Greensboro, and as Director of Resource Acquisition at the University of Nevada, Reno. He serves on numerous editorial and advisory boards and is a regular contributor to the Scholarly Kitchen blog, as well as writing a regular column for Library Journal's Academic Newswire. He's a popular speaker on subjects related to the future of scholarly communication and research libraries, and he served last year as the president of Society for Scholarly Publishing. Welcome, Rick, and thanks again for making all this happen. Now I'll turn it over to you as the moderator.
Thanks, Leah, and thanks very much to Sara and Anne for being willing to participate as our debaters this session. We're going to quickly review the rules of the Hyde Park debate. Let's see, Leah, can I have the next slide? So these debates are conducted in broad conformity with the Oxford Union Rules of Debate. So our proposition that we are debating is resolved. The journal impact factor does more harm than good. One of our debaters will be arguing in favor of that proposition. The other will be arguing against the proposition. Now, before the debate begins, we're going to invite the audience to give their opinions on either in favor of or against the proposition. So each audience member will be invited to cast a vote in favor of it or against it. After the debate is over, we'll ask all of those who cast a vote at the beginning to then cast a new vote, and the winner of the debate will be the person who moved the greatest number of votes over to her position. So we are going to open with Sara, who will be arguing in favor of the proposition. She will open with a 10-minute statement, and that time limit will be strictly enforced throughout the debate. Immediately following Sara, Anne will then argue against the proposition. Following each of those opening 10-minute statements, we'll have a 3-minute response from each of the debaters. And then following the second 3-minute response, during the time that we have remaining, we'll be inviting questions and comments from our attendees, and we will let Anne and Sara respond to as many of those as we have time for. They'll be entertained in the order received until we run out of time. At about 5 minutes to the hour, we will redo the poll, and at that point, we'll be ready to declare a winner. So I think that we can go ahead, and I will turn the time over to Sara. I'll turn my camera off, and I think Anne has done the same. And Sara, go ahead. Your 10-minute period begins.
Before we start, Rick, I'm sorry to interrupt. Do we want to let people vote first, or are they doing that now?
Oh yes, sorry. Yeah, let's give everybody. Well, we'll watch the votes coming in. I assume that this is visible to all of our attendees as well. When it looks like the votes have pretty much stopped coming in, we'll close the poll.
And there's a couple folks who are asking about a dial-in number, as there seems to be an issue with voice cutting to music and back. I think that dial-in number is available, Leah, in the invite or in the initial audio, but we might want to put that in the chat so people can call in if their microphones aren't working.
All right, votes are slowing down.
You're all voting like the entire country. This is excellent.
All right, I think we're about ready to close it. I'm going to give it another 20 seconds. So anybody who hasn't voted and would like to, please do so within the next 20 seconds, at which point I'm going to close the poll and make a note of the, it's interesting how it's tightened up in the last couple of minutes. All right, we're now going to close the poll. And it was 81 to 70. All right, and now I will turn off my camera. And Sara, you may now start.
Thank you so much. It is my honor to join you today and argue in favor of the statement resolved. The journal impact factor does more harm than good. While I would say the issue is probably not resolved, I'll argue the case, but perhaps not for the reasons you'd expect. After all, the journal impact factor's shortcomings are well documented. It's become the test to which the academic community teaches. And rather than letting it become the sort of, or stay the quantitative journal measure of impact alongside a number of other metrics, it's really become the metric that researchers, publishers, and editors are hunting for prestige and compensation. So it was originally meant to help scientists make decisions about where to read, to help librarians make decisions on what to purchase, and instead it has become the one number that rules us all. So before we get into some of the more insidious issues with the journal impact factor, I want to review the arguments repeated ad nauseum with respect to the shortcomings of this measure. The first is that it lacks context, right? There are many reasons to cite a paper, not all of them are positive, and that context is lost in a number. It disadvantages fields and research products that cannot or do not publish. It's supposed to reflect journal influence, but really has become a proxy for article impact. It privileges journal articles as the metric, as the vehicle for research, despite the fact that there are many others. And it's gameable and frequently gamed, as many of us have seen. But perhaps most importantly, it ignores the evolution of an open, iterative research lifecycle that's really been made possible by the internet, open access mandates, and really new forms of creating and sharing knowledge online. So put simply, the journal impact factor reduces a complex set of factors into a number that does neither the journal, its readers, and the research community much justice. And the fact that I represent Altmetric, which has devised a score that quantifies essentially qualitative engagement with research content, that irony is not lost on me, but I will come back to alternative metrics later. So all of that said, despite the consensus around these shortcomings, journal impact factor still is the dominant metric. And my argument as to why this is harmful goes something like this. The journal impact factor is harmful because it is a crucial pillar in the Western research industrial complex. It perpetuates, or it is one of the many structures that perpetuate inequities that underpin the academic endeavor globally. And it systematically excludes large communities by setting them at a disadvantage from the start. So what is the Western research industrial complex? I've obviously chosen a very loaded term intentionally. Ultimately, it is the system of evaluation and rewards designed by white Western English-speaking men in centers of knowledge and wealth in the West. It's that system of evaluation and rewards designed to evaluate all scientific research globally, regardless of whether it is in the humanities to the biomedical space, so research globally. It's born of thinkers that go back as far as the Enlightenment, Francis Bacon, the economic theories of Adam Smith, and its proponents on this side of the pond are well known to us, our founding fathers, Madison, Franklin, Jefferson. And these sort of, this research industrial complex, its institutions and the individuals involved in it are deeply implicated in building structural barriers designed to further advance its own scholarly and economic interests. And this isn't new to anyone. These scholars and institutions create the research, they vet the research, they accept or reject it. They write, edit, and review for huge commercial entities, Western commercial entities. And while they don't necessarily receive compensation, they do get status within this closed ecosystem. They run the professional societies that bestow awards and cement prestige. And of course, they review the thousands of grant applications that determine who gets money and who doesn't to do their work. So this highly privileged superstructure, if you'll allow a irresistible allusion to Marx, is an enclosed loop with gatekeepers at every point, and the journal impact factor is a critical gatekeeper. So theorists of power and knowledge, Michel Foucault, Frantz Fanon, Karl Marx, they've all long argued that systems of power insinuate themselves so deeply that their captives not only accept, but often embrace the norms of the system, even though they're disadvantaged by them. And recent quantitative peer-reviewed research corroborates this. And again, I emphasize peer-reviewed and quantitative because those are the qualifiers most prized by the research industrial complex. So I can't even escape the system when I'm trying to argue against it. But Cassidy Musujimoto and her collaborators at Indiana University Bloomington documented the significant disparities in gender citations in a December 2013 Nature article, in which they state, quote, "Our study lends solid quantitative support to what is intuitively known. Barriers to women in science remain widespread worldwide, despite more than a decade of policies aimed at leveling the playing field," end quote. So while the Sujimoto team is discussing citations and not journal impact factors specifically, these are all interrelated metrics produced most famously by Clarivate Analytics in their journal citation report. And that brings me to another major pillar of the research industrial complex, the monetization of metrics. And I should caveat this by saying that, I work for a for-profit myself. I have no intrinsic issue with a company that responsibly makes profit in return for delivering innovative product and services. That said, it should be no surprise that the impact factor was created and monetized by a son of this privileged ecosystem. Part of Eugene Garfield's brilliance is that he not only created the impact factor, but he developed an entire set of algorithms and indices for measuring engagement with journal content. Not only does the journal impact factor reinforce the successes of the power centers that created it, its commercialization by Western company further cements its status. So the knowledge producers in this ecosystem are not only served by the metrics they've created, they're incentivized to create more products, metrics, and services to further parse the meaning of the metrics they've already created to generate revenue. So consider how many new alternatives to journal impact factor have come out recently, from the site score to SNP to the article influence indicator and even Altmetrics. These new metrics are all still based in journals or journal articles, but they're meant to give us a way out. So if the journal impact factor isn't working, here's another journal or article-based metric that might help you look better. And never mind that the new measures are just as deeply entrenched in the politics of journal publishing as the old ones. So while it's not likely that Garfield intended to build or monetize a system that privileged the white Western male English-speaking milieu he came from, he had the sense to see that everyone was playing the game. And if the game is happening, why not build a field, a fence, keep score, and charge people to play? So as with all ticketed events, though, there are always people who find a way in through some other means. And the advent of alternative metrics has really been driven in large part by the realization that these traditional journal metrics were not serving many folks who needed to demonstrate their impact. The dissatisfaction with paywall-driven journal metrics really wasn't serving the growing, evolving, and iterative research landscape that doesn't start with a grant and end with a publication, but in fact is a lifetime of work. So digital humanities, citizen science, social science research, anything revolving strong community engagement, none of these areas were really going to be served by metrics like an impact factor. So I'll close with an example. If we're thinking of this research industrial complex as a highly gated baseball game, there are other researchers getting into the game, and they are doing it by making new fields. I'm thinking specifically of the students at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy. They created their own publication to discuss gender and conflict in the Middle East. They started the Journal of Women and Human Rights in the Middle East, most likely because the students working at Rice were not able to get published elsewhere. A number of them are, in fact, undergraduates. So they couldn't buck the research industrial complex completely, but they redefined their contours. And you know what? Their journal does not have an impact factor. So with that, I'll conclude my statements, summarizing in agreement that the journal impact factor does more harm than good. Thank you.
All right, thanks very much, Anne. I will now ask Anne to turn off I'm sorry, I'll now ask Sarah. Okay, I just called Sarah Ann. I'll now ask Sarah to turn off her camera and ask Ann to turn hers on. And I will turn my camera off. And Ann, your time now begins. Go.
Thank you. The journal impact factor does more harm than good. When I was approached for this debate, I thought, am I being punished for something? Maybe it's a good thing that we changed our name, since you might have thought I worked somewhere else. But honestly, I'm very grateful for this opportunity to share my thoughts with you and to hear what you have to say about this topic. I'd like to start with a quote. Like nuclear energy, the impact factor has become a mixed blessing. Words from Dr. Eugene Garfield, the co-creator of the Journal Impact Factor and the founder of the Institute for Scientific Information, today part of Clarivate Analytics. Like most scientific advances, he couldn't predict where it would lead, nor can we quantify how much harm or good it has done. As a scientific community, most of us would agree that quantitative analysis is a valuable tool, and quantitative analysis of science, the science of science, is also valuable. There's value in scientific activities through publications and other means in order to improve our understanding of science, scientists, their organizations, their funders, etc. Only with understanding can we make better decisions, whether you are a funder deciding who should receive your precious dollars, or a department head deciding whom to hire, or a researcher deciding where to submit a manuscript. I believe that our community can benefit by informing those decisions with the best data. When Dr. Garfield created the Science Citation Index and the Journal Citation Reports many moons ago, he never could have imagined where it would all lead. His and Irving Scher's original goals with the Journal Impact Factor in the early 1960s were around information retrieval and discovery, to help select the best journals for the Science Citation Index. They hoped it could help librarians to inform collection development decisions by adding a quantitative dimension. Fast forward 50-plus years, and we see the Journal Impact Factor and other bibliometrics being used and sometimes abused in diverse ways that have become ingrained in the scientific ecosystem and never intended by Garfield and colleagues. How did we get here? Let's first clarify what it is and isn't. The Journal Impact Factor has taken on an almost mythical aura and become more than it is, bigger than it is. There are countless articles written about it, dissecting it every which way. Sometimes I think we can stop marketing JCR because our critics do such a good job themselves. It's become a symbol, some would say scapegoat, for all the pitfalls of bibliometrics. Yet it's really a simple calculation when you get to the heart of it. It's a ratio of citations received by a journal in 1 year to articles and reviews in that journal from the previous 2 years. It's an indicator of a journal's citation activity in that 3-year window, taking citations received by all documents in that journal and scaling them by the size of the journal. Nothing more and nothing less. We are not a publisher, and we would gain nothing by being opaque with this. In fact, we continue to transparency. We are adding a direct link to the documents in the denominator to make the underlying data clear, and we hope to expose even more data going forward. Now that we've cleared up what it is, let me take a step back. We can all probably agree that we have a metrics problem, maybe an addiction. I've seen publishers one day denounce the Journal Impact Factor and the next promote their new impact factor in a press release. Like many rankings, if you do well, you like it. If your rank goes down, then the ranking must be flawed. I think most of us see the value in research metrics, but we want them to be better. We want them to be used in the best way, with the best understanding, in conjunction with the best human judgment. That's the ideal. So you ask what Journal Impact Factor, one metric out of many, has done more harm than good. Perhaps what we're really talking about is whether bibliometrics have done more harm than good. When I reflect on the legacy of the Journal Impact Factor, one can argue that it has ushered in the modern age of bibliometrics. Without it, where would bibliometrics be today? We have to remember that it came out in the era of paper and punch cards. We are spoiled by today's computing power. Back then, very few people could do bibliometrics. Journal Impact Factor was ready-made and it filled a need. It provided an unbiased, quantitative perspective on journals that never existed before. A journal can now be evaluated and ranked against its peers based on numbers, the language of science, not based on someone's opinion. That turning point is one of the key benefits of Journal Impact Factor and its legacy, which we tend to take for granted. When the Journal Impact Factor came out, scientific publishing was an old boys club, difficult to penetrate if you were a woman, a minority, from a non-Western country, or a non-English speaker. Is it better to have metrics that add a non-biased, internationally representative, quantitative counterpoint to this culture? I think so. Should we rely solely on such metrics? Of course not. Journal Impact Factor does more harm than good. Ironically, it's not something we can easily quantify. Have bibliometrics, Journal Impact Factor, and otherwise been used in strange and incorrect ways? Yes, I see it all the time. What is the solution? If we were able to magically erase Journal Impact Factor, from history, what would happen? I think some other journal metric would fill its vacuum. It would be naive to think that suddenly the misuse and misunderstanding would stop. People are people. They do things for a reason. They use journal impact factor in weird ways because of ignorance, because of convenience, because of habit. In fact, journal impact factor has taught us valuable lessons in scientometrics, including altmetrics. We need to normalize the data to think about the consequences of our metrics, to adjust and augment our metrics when they are insufficient. It has taught us lessons that are still very useful and have furthered the dialogue around quantitative measurement of science, and that is a benefit, not a harm. So let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's not discount all citation metrics because of the journal impact factor's limitations and misuse. So what should we do to improve this situation? We and others constantly educate the community about the best way to use bibliometrics. I'm very encouraged that more librarians are seeking bibliometrics training. There is no need to over-rely on the journal impact factor to make it do things it can't do. If you want to evaluate an article's citation performance, there are article-level metrics to do that. We have category and journal normalized citation ratios and percentiles in category for every article in our database. These article-level metrics can be aggregated for a person, an institution, a journal, etc., to evaluate that body of work against its cohort. So what can the journal impact factor tell you? It represents a journal as a whole. That's what it's always done and continues to do. It is one journal metric among many found in the JCR, like 5-year impact factor, MEDC index, eigenfactor, citing, and cited half-life, each telling you something different about a journal citation activity. Collectively, these metrics tell a rich story about a journal and its relationship within the network of journals. The journal impact factor, when used in conjunction with other JCR metrics and other data, provides valuable information about a journal's overall impact. I believe it has done good in helping publishers add a quantitative dimension to otherwise subjective decisions. I believe it has done good in helping librarians add a quantitative dimension to their collections decisions. I believe it has done good in helping funders to assess the journals an applicant has published in, especially an early career researcher without citations. I believe it has done good in helping researchers to understand the relative impact of the journals in their field in a way that is impossible from their individual perspective. Citations are a measure of usefulness through which we can crowdsource the opinions of the entire scientific community. No one researcher nor librarian can read everything in her field, especially as scientific publication continues to expand. So leveraging the wisdom of the crowd is valuable to extend beyond your own circle and tap into the expertise of the global scientific community. That is a good, not a harm, when we are all plagued by information overload. Statistics pervade our lives: fantasy football, Facebook likes, credit scores, SATs. When I take my baby to the doctor, I'm anxious to know her weight percentile because she's had weight issues. And yes, every child is unique, and yes, there are many factors at play. But nonetheless, I find it helpful to know how she compares with other babies since I can't possibly gauge that myself. I can't help but compare. Can this be harmful? Sure, if I stress out too much about that number. All metrics need context and common sense. Similarly, the journal impact factor is helpful for its intended purpose as a broad measure of the citation activity of a journal to be used in conjunction with other data and human judgment. It is not the end-all and be-all any more than SATs are the only judge of a student's intelligence. The journal impact factor has become a symbol for the frustrations and anxieties people feel about research metrics. It made the mistake of being one of the earliest bibliometrics when there were few alternatives, and it has been forced to do things it was never meant to do. But the past is the past. My hope is that our community can come together to establish and encourage the best possible use of research metrics across the ecosystem: publishers, researchers, department heads, funders, and anyone else who cares about science. It's not a Clarivate problem or a journal impact factor problem. It's a community problem. Changing a mindset and changing ingrained practices is daunting. Things are slowly changing, so there is hope, but it will happen only if we work together. For ushering in the age of modern bibliometrics, for teaching us important lessons about scientometrics, for bringing quantitative evaluation to journal-based decisions, and helping to democratize the publishing process, I believe the journal impact factor has done more good than harm, and it's up to all of us to do it justice going forward.
All right, thanks very much, Anne. I will pause at this moment to note that Anne's audio was not ideal. I hope everybody was able to understand it. When we tested before the debate began, it was fine. So I'm not sure what happened there. But in any case, this is our first time doing this, doing the debate as a webcast. So I think we've already learned a technical lesson here. I'm now going to take just a moment and before we move to the 3-minute responses, I want to remind the attendees that the chat bar is the place in which to start submitting questions whenever you're ready. You can wait to submit your questions or comments until after the responses are done, or you can begin right now if you want. And with that, I'm going to invite Sara to now give her 3-minute response. I'll turn my camera off. Sara, you're ready to go.
Thank you. I'm going to spend my time focusing on one section of Anne's very comprehensive prepared remarks. She focuses on the reasons for potential misuse of impact factor across the board, and says specifically, quote, "People are people. They do things for research for any reason. They do things for a reason. They use journal impact factor in weird ways because of ignorance, because of convenience, because of habit," end quote. This statement seems to suggest that impact factor misuse is born of lack of education or information, or even lack of effort. And I want to be careful here, because that argument is frequently used to explain why developing or third world countries have not achieved the political, economic, and scientific gains of the West. So it's an argument that is obviously used in a lot of different spheres, but can play out here as well. So rather than assuming that researchers are ill-informed or just don't understand the metric, I want to examine a bit of the incentives that are driving them to focus on this metric so heavily. The fact is, institutions globally want to be a part of the research industrial complex if they are not. They want to be recognized globally as peers, and they have to participate in the system, obviously, to be recognized by it. So the very first hurdle the research industrial complex throws up is the publish or perish paradigm, wherein if you don't publish in Science, Nature, the top impact factor journals, you fail as an academic. Researchers outside this walled garden are increasingly convinced that they're at a disadvantage. So I've sat down with thousands of grad students in Mexico City, in Kyoto, in Mumbai, in Seoul, in Hangzhou, and all of them have definitely said that if you are not in the system, getting into the system is much harder, whether it's if your PI has a name that's recognized, or you did your undergraduate or graduate research at a recognized institution, the entry points are harder. Now, maybe this next generation of researchers, non-Western researchers, are making excuses. They are not producing good research, and they're looking for ways to explain that, but they're also being incentivized in different ways, and I think that's important to remember. So consider the fact, the Chinese invented gunpowder, the compass, printing press. Arabs invented algebra and the concept of zero, and yet today the Chinese and Saudi Arabia are the two countries that spend the most in incentivizing their researchers to publish in top journals. China spent as much as $165,000 as a cash prize to one researcher for publishing in one of those journals. Saudi Arabia is second, and Qatar is right behind it. So that's how they're trying to get their researchers into the research industrial complex. And, algebra and gunpowder were free. So it's that is the cost of entry into a closed system, and it's something we should consider when we're looking at why this metric gets misused and misinterpreted. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Sara. Anne, your turn.
Good. I'm not going to apologize for being a company. I don't think that determines whether the journal impact factor has done more harm or good. We all have a business model, and there's nothing wrong with providing a service that people find valuable enough to pay for. I will say that the immense amount of work that goes into creating the JCR and the Web of Science is expensive, but necessary in order to maintain high-quality, reliable data. As far as the calculation itself, I can't discuss every point in 3 minutes, but I will remind us of the Leiden Manifesto principles, such as using a variety of metrics to see the full picture, using the appropriate metric for what you are trying to measure, and normalizing for field differences. I think we should take a holistic view of research activities, looking at not just publications, but presentations, patents, clinical activity, data sets, grad student training, policy and societal impact, etc. The existence of the journal impact factor does not preclude these things or disadvantage them, nor does the holistic view prove that the journal impact factor has done more harm than good. And I'd like to point out that the Web of Science citation counts are used by Altmetric. As far as gaming goes, any metric can be gamed. It's a fact of life that we all need to be aware of. Social media metrics can be gamed just as much as citation metrics can. Part of the service we provide is monitoring for such activity in the literature. We suppress journals for getting a journal impact factor if they exhibit suspicious citation practices. And we drop journals from Web of Science core collection when they cease to meet our standards, whether for ethical or other reasons. I think this is more good than harm. As for the Western research industrial complex, modern institutionalized science is not unlike most other institutions in that it was started by white Anglo-Saxon males, since those were the people in charge. But journal impact factor has evolved as scientific publishing has evolved. Today we cover 18,000 journals in the Web of Science core collection, including over 5,000 in the Emerging Sources Citation Index. These 5,000 represent non-mainstream journals that still meet ethical and technical standards, but are not highly cited and don't necessarily have global authorship. These journals represent authors from over 200 countries, with 80% of the papers from outside North America. 35% of the articles are gold open access, and 19% are in a language other than English. Citations from ESCI contribute to the journal impact factor. As the research world evolves and gets more diverse, that diversity is then reflected in the published literature and therefore in the journal impact factor. And I will add that we are making open access articles more discoverable through a partnership with Impact Story, whereby we will link from the Web of Science to gold and or green versions of millions of OA articles. And to say Dr. Garfield was the son of a privileged ecosystem is not entirely fair. Yes, he was white and male, but he was raised by a single teenage mother, worked various blue-collar jobs, and was truly a self-made man. He was known for his generosity both in his business, where he employed many minorities and promoted women into leadership roles, but also in scholarship, where he was a financial and intellectual benefactor to many globally, especially researchers from regions underprivileged by the Western research industrial complex. Thank you.
All right, thanks very much. So Sara, I'll invite you to turn your camera back on, and we will start working our way through some of the questions that have come in. The first one is a little bit awkwardly phrased, but in fairness to the author, I'm just going to read it as it's written and allow you guys to decide how to respond. The question is, and the GIF is responsible for exclusion? Question mark. Feel free to jump in, whoever would like to speak to that. And feel free to unmute yourself.
Sorry. No, I don't think the GIF by itself is responsible for that exclusion. The argument I was trying to make is that there are a whole system of standards that, intentionally or not, necessitate and facilitate exclusion to a certain degree. So no, one number by itself can't do that. But the power that this number has had over individuals' lives in terms of how they can establish careers, have secure jobs, get promoted, does impact people. But no, it's never one thing. Systematic exclusion is a much bigger thing than one metric.
Anne?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was maybe related to what Sara said. So I think I'm in agreement with the question that journal impact factor is not responsible for that exclusion, as I described.
Okay, the next question. It is easy to say, quote, "We need to change how people use the impact factor," end quote, but I've never heard any solutions or suggestions on how we can make this change. Any ideas? And we'll let you go first this time.
Yeah, so I alluded to the fact that we're constantly educating the community, and I could attest to that definitely in my role here and the team I work with. So day in and day out, we're doing bibliometrics training, essentially trying to help people understand what bibliometrics are, what their limitations are, what their benefits are, how to use these different metrics. So I think, the educational efforts that we do and that others do, library schools, bibliometric experts, at Leiden, they do a lot of courses on bibliometrics. And I'm seeing this really in the U.S. now becoming even more frequent, and these requests for bibliometrics training, especially in the library community, becoming, much more prominent. So I think, education is big, and I think sharing examples of good uses of bibliometrics is really important. So rather than, perpetuating incorrect uses, I think that those who are using these data, whether it's a government body, a university, a publisher, being willing to communicate and share what they're doing beyond just the impact factor, because it is going on. We see it all the time with our data. It's just I think people don't see it as much because the journal impact factor kind of steals the limelight and gets all the negativity, and people don't see the good uses and the value of bibliometrics as much.
Sara? Sara, you there? I think you're muted again.
I was muted again. If I do it a third time, we should just kick me off the webinar. So I'm going to go two ways with this. The first is that as long as tenure and promotion committees and people who grant money are fixated with these journal and article-based metrics, this will not go away. So misuse, misinterpretation, education, all of that is critical. And I think Clarivate's done a really good job with that. And librarians have led the charge with that. But if you can't get your department head to think a little bit more broadly about what that metric means, then this will never change. And so really what I'd love to see is let's stop using this metric. So as journals launch, not using that as a way to show the efficacy or failure of the journal. I sat next to Jeremy Berg, editor-in-chief at Science, on a panel, and they've just launched, I believe it's Science Advances, and if I'm wrong, someone's going to call me out, I'm sure. It's an open access journal that they're producing, and he said, you know, our fingers are crossed in 2 years that the impact factor is really good, otherwise we're going to be really disappointed. And I just turned to him and I was like, Jeremy, you're Science. You don't need an impact factor. This journal is going to get attention and submissions because it's, you know, backed by a really important organization. And he said, like, he just sort of gave me this look like, no, we can't get away from it. So I think until some people have this sort of bravery, besides, you know, the students at Rice University, to launch big name journals that look at their reach in some other way, it's really hard to fix it.
Okay, our next question. How do you vet scholarly information without impact factor journals? I think it's Sarah's turn to go first.
Open peer review is really being, well, peer review personally is doing the vetting. It's not the impact factor, right? The impact factor is measuring citation counts. I always forget the definition. I'm sure Anne has it memorized. The peer review is doing that. The fact that peer review is single blind often is a huge problem. And, you know, to plug something that an organization I admire is doing a lot, Gates Foundation is launching Gates Open Research this fall, and that journal will accept all articles as long as they are methodologically sound and obviously not, you know, they have the integrity of the research present. But the article would be, you know, when it meets those standards, the article will be posted on their platform, and then the community will be invited to review that article in real time, and, you know, not behind avatars, but folks disclosing who they are. Publons and PubPeer are two sites where researchers are publicly vetting research post-publication. So there's a lot of ways to ensure that what's being touted as research is valid and sound and reproducible. The journal impact factor, I don't think, has to be involved in that.
Anne?
Can you repeat the question again, Rick?
Absolutely. The question is, how do you vet scholarly information without impact factor journals?
Yeah, well, I think, you know, the impact factor is meant to reflect the impact of the journal, right? The quality of the journal in some way. So it, you know, correlates with, you know, all the activities going on at the journal, including the peer review, like Sara mentioned. So, you know, Science would be a good journal if it didn't have an impact factor, right? We're reflecting the quality of that journal and all the processes going on with that journal, because, you know, if it's doing a good job of doing high quality peer review, of being selective, selecting good material, then it should go on to be used by other scientists, which is what we're measuring with citations, right? So, you know, this question of how do you make sure you're a good journal essentially is a big question. You know, journals that do alternative types of peer review or open peer review, I mean, that's still kind of, you know, yet to be seen how that will all play out. I mean, I think having traditional peer review is still very, very valuable. And like I said, we're not, you know, dictating that in some way. I mean, we are reflecting sort of the life of this journal and how it goes on to be used by the community. So, I mean, some people might think we're dictating that, but we're really, I think, reflecting all of those activities happening with the journal and the interactions of its readers and users in this metric.
All right, thanks. Let's go to the next question. Sorry, my screen keeps kind of moving on me. My apologies. Okay, here we go. So the next question is, but how do you convince the people who are deciding if academic faculty get tenure or not that the other altmetrics are as valid as the GIF and should be weighted equally? So let me read that again. But how do you convince the people who are deciding if academic faculty get tenure or not that other altmetrics are as valid as the GIF and should be weighted equally? And I think it's your turn to go first.
Yeah, well, I think the question here is really, how should research metrics be used, right? So, I mean, I think if you're a department head, you need to look at what makes sense for your department, right? So, first of all, you can't compare humanities to physical sciences, to medical sciences, to economics, et cetera. So I think what I would say is, what do you find valuable? What do you want your researchers to be doing? And it doesn't have to be an either or. I think, yes, there's still value in publishing in high quality journals and getting cited by your peers. I don't think anyone would disagree with that. Maybe they think it's valuable to also have a big social media impact, that people on Twitter like what you're doing, more of a broader impact. Maybe they really value in certain fields having, policy impact, which is sort of an altmetric. This holistic view, I think, is a very good one. But as I said in my rebuttal, I don't think that it precludes the use of bibliometrics as part of that view. And I think, bibliometrics has had a long lifetime of scrutiny and scholarship. It's a whole field of research of people studying bibliometrics. What do they mean? Really analyzing the data. You can use confined data sets like the Web of Science. Altmetrics, I think, is still, in that early stage because it is more of a gray area of data that's out there, and I think people are still studying, how do you gauge what altmetrics mean? I mean, we figured out ways to normalize, citations to try to give them more context and meaning. I think that's where altmetrics needs to go in finding those, ways to normalize, to add context, to define the universe, to make scientists, who ultimately are the people doing these administrative jobs, to find them valid and find their place amongst other ways to measure performance.
Sara?
Yeah, so I'm just quickly going to respond to that. I mean, altmetrics are new, but they're not that new. So the standards around them are absolutely coalescing. If folks are familiar with NISO, National Information Standards Organization, has just released a large set of recommendations around standards for altmetrics, because that is one of the primary concerns about it, is what is a download, what does a tweet mean, and those. So that's evolving, and I think we're coming a long way, particularly with metrics that are transparent and fully contextualized. But to get back to the original question with respect to, if tenure and promotion committees don't buy in, then how do we do this? Well, there's a couple ways. The first way is government mandates, right? I mean, that is the way to go. When funders like Gates Foundation or the NIH or NSF are saying we need you to demonstrate broader impact, broader meaning broader than academia, you're not going to get your answer to that grant question through your citation counts. It's simply not going to be possible. So folks have to think more creatively about how do I demonstrate that. And certainly if you're being asked to make your work open access as well, you're more likely to be able to engage in those non-academic platforms. The other piece that is turning the tide here really falls into the demographics of the researchers themselves. So age, the field, and your job status are basically the three big indicators of whether you're going to look at these metrics. Obviously, younger researchers who come of age using tools like Mendeley who are fairly comfortable with social media, these sorts of folks who get their information online from day one and didn't have to transition from print to digital, so to speak, are more naturally inclined this way. Fields are. So, physicists love to share. Archive was ahead of its time in terms of showing us the value of preprint servers. Same with digital humanities, right? They couldn't exist without the online platforms that we have now. And lastly, job status, right? I mean, if you're a tenured professor, you have the luxury of using whatever metrics you want. Your job doesn't depend on it. So younger researchers they both understand the possibilities, but are also hemmed in by some of the constraints of the people evaluating them. But the tide is turning there. But mandates sure will make it happen a lot faster.
Okay, the next question. This one is kind of related, so you guys may feel like you've already answered it to some degree, but here it is. The JIF drives tenure and promotion. How can we develop a better incentive system that addresses broader goals than peer citations? Sara, I think it's your turn to go first.
We can urge funding agencies to really ask for demonstrable impact, not just citation counts. And they are doing that. I mean, NSF came out with the broader impact statement in 2010. The new NIH BioSketch very much focuses researchers on a couple of research products that have actually demonstrated reach. And the European funders have been doing this for a while, which is one reason that these metrics have taken off in Europe and the UK. So yeah, it's got to be a stick. It's usually not a carrot.
Anne?
Yeah, I mean, I think we did kind of cover it, but to reiterate, yeah, I think that department heads really should take a step back and think about what they really want to measure. I mean, whether it's being mandated by the funders or not. I mean, these are your employees, right? What is your mission? What are you trying to measure? And anyone who just mindlessly uses some measurement just because it's been used before, that's what I was trying to get at in my opening statement, that, things become kind of the practice because they're the practice and no one gives it a second thought. But I think, if anything, if we could just get these folks to think a little bit about what it is they're trying to measure and what that means in the end for their faculty and their scientists, how will it change behavior? How will it impact what they do on a day-to-day basis? And, maybe they need to come together, wherever they meet, their conferences, and talk about these things. I mean, I've been on a lot of conferences that talk about how do we measure social impact, and, it's a very complicated question. People in sort of the science metrics field debate this stuff, but I don't know if the department heads and administrators are part of that conversation. So one thing I would say is trying to get them a little more engaged with the scholars who are thinking about these things to kind of bring the theory and the practice together a little bit more and drive it forward.
Okay, the next question. Perhaps the question isn't, has the JIF done more harm than good, but has the JIF outlived its usefulness? It makes a lot of sense in an analog world. Many other useful data points are available today. And again, this one was a little long, so I'll read it again. Perhaps the question isn't, has the JIF done more harm than good, but has the JIF outlived its usefulness? It makes a lot of sense in an analog world. Many other useful data points are available today. Anne?
Yeah, it's definitely old, as we said. I mean, this thing has been out for a long time. Would Dr. Garfield create something different today, with the resources available and the knowledge available? Maybe. But what I will say is that over the 50 plus years of its existence, that, we've evolved quite a bit. So, we look at journal performance very holistically. So in the journal citation reports, if you've ever looked at this, there's many data points about a journal. I mentioned some of them in my statement, right? We have different metrics that we've developed over the years to kind of go beyond the impact factor, right? So even when you're talking about journal metrics, it's not just the impact factor. I mean, we would love for people to use these other metrics more. And, the journal impact factor kind of overshadows a lot of very valuable data we have in the JCR about a 5-year impact factor to account for fields that are slower moving, a immediacy index to look at the recent year, eigenfactor metrics that look at the network of journal relationships, the journal citing and cited half-life, all these characteristics of a journal, I think, come together to tell that story of what the journal's doing. So, I would say, first of all, look at what is there for journals. And I think, because there have been so many alternatives out there proposed of the journal impact factor, as I also mentioned, if it were just to disappear, I think something else would take its place. I think people have this yearning and this need, whether they like it or not, to rank things and to have a way to compare in a quantitative fashion, how these journals perform, whether it's based on their, social media presence, whether it's based on their readership, whether it's based on their citation impact. So I don't think that need will go away. And I think the journal impact factor still has a place in that ecosystem alongside of, other ways to look at the journal's impact.
All right. Our next question.
Oh, do I get to respond to that one, right?
Sorry. Yes, Sarah. My apologies.
That's fine. I actually remembered to unmute this time. I do think it's out. I like that idea of analog to digital. It's not the best digital metric if you want to use that kind of analog to digital simile there. I think that's appropriate. I think or I guess a point in favor of the journal impact factor, it's not so much people want to rank things. I think people want to categorize things, right? So there's a deluge of scientific information coming at me. I'm a grad student who, works 12 hours a day in a lab. I have an hour and a half to read what I have to read. Like, I know I have to start at the top journals in my field and sort of work my way down, right? And so I've asked graduate students, if you didn't have journals, what would you do? And they all just their heads kind of explode because they need a way of grouping things to know what they look at, right? And so they know if I read science, it's going to be good stuff. And then of course the fact is the journal's impact factor does not speak to the quality of the articles, right? So they'll go through and go, I don't understand why Science keeps publishing X. It's rubbish every time. It keeps getting published, right? So I think what's insidious is that just because an item ends up in a good journal, it gets swept up in the reputation and prestige of that journal, even though it may not be there, it might have slipped through the cracks. And now, researchers can, their careers are made, they get $165,000 from the Chinese government, and they actually haven't contributed to the science. So I don't know how you untangle that transition from a journal measure to an article impact proxy, which is what it's become. And to that end, that's why I think there needs to be something else. Partially because so much of that research will never end up in journals. And so if that is your measure, you're never going to be able to catch all the code, all of the other kinds of things people are producing that won't be represented there.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question before we need to close the discussion period and administer the closing poll. And I'm going to ask both Anne and Sarah each to take 30 seconds to respond to this so that we can end at 5 minutes to the hour. The last question is, what do you think of products such as Cabell's whitelist and its new blacklist? And I can never remember whether it's Cabell's or Cabell's, but hopefully everybody knows who I'm referring to. What do you think of products such as Cabell's whitelist and its new blacklist that seeks to provide metrics at a journal level? Sarah, please take 30 seconds to respond, and then Anne.
I'll confess I'm not super familiar with these white and black lists, but I'm assuming the white list is good and the black list is bad. So I'm going to work from that. Again, I think all of the lists that speak... Basically,
journal directory, and the blacklist is a list of presumably predatory journals. So.
Oh, okay. So it's predatory as opposed to sort of respected or legitimate journals. Insofar as these lists recommend places to avoid or to publish in, I don't think there's any intrinsic issue. I mean, I think the blacklist is attempting to stop people from being tricked to spend money, in disreputable outlets. I think the more important question is, but other than those lists, would maybe be something like looking at Sherpa Romeo, choosing journals not because of how they are ranked or how they score, but how they effectively can disseminate your work to a lot of people. Are they open access? How robust is their online dissemination efforts, those sorts of things. So again, my lack of familiarity with those two lists is probably not helping here, but I think it's more an issue of what can the journal do for you, and obviously it shouldn't be predatory.
Okay, thanks. Anne?
Yeah, so I haven't looked at those products in detail, but what I can say is, we've been known through the Web of Science core collection to sort of provide this service of the whitelist for a very long time. So part of what you're paying for with our service is an editorial team who's selecting journals based on a variety of standards that we've applied for many years, sanctioning them as high quality peer reviewed journals, and then extended into this emerging sources set that I mentioned today. We do drop journals when they cease to meet those standards, whether for predatory reasons or otherwise. So essentially, I feel like we're doing a pretty good job of that. I don't know what Cabela's is doing, but certainly our master journalist is publicly available. So a lot of people use that, whether they have our products or not, to look at journals that have gone through that vetting process and that they know meet the standards that we make public and transparent on our website.
Okay, thanks very much, everyone. Thanks to all who submitted questions. I apologize that we didn't have time to get to all of them, but now we need to move quickly into the closing poll. This is the moment of truth. Please go ahead. Now, I do need to remind anybody who did not participate in the opening poll, please don't participate in the closing poll, because we want to make sure that we're polling the exact same population of respondents. All right, the votes are coming in. Sara, would you sing for us while we...
I was going to say, this is nail-biting stuff, like watching it in real time.
And your audio isn't so good, so if Sara could sing and if Anne could dance while the votes come in, then I think...
No, Rick, I think you
don't want to see that.
For the intro. You're the moderator.
Yeah, that's true. Nobody wants to see me dance, though, believe me. And for those who are, and I'm not sure which parts of the screen our attendees can see, but the opening poll result was 81 in favor of the proposition. The journal impact factor does more harm than good. 81 for and 70 against.
Are less people voting this time?
It looks like it.
Left.
Or am I just not doing math right? It could be the latter.
Well, 81 and 70 is 156, and right now we've got 106 people who have voted.
You scared people away by telling them not to vote.
By threatening to dance? Well, this is interesting. I'm not sure how we declare a winner when we end up with when both positions end up with fewer votes than they started with.
I know. Should we do a percentage then?
I guess we could do a percentage. Who's good at math? I would assume that Anne is.
Oh, that's so mean. That's so mean.
I'm too nervous. I'm too nervous. Don't make me the arbiter of this.
Hold on.
It looks like the voting has pretty much stopped. I'm going to give 15 seconds for anybody who's been trying to decide how to vote to get their vote in, and in 15 seconds we'll close the poll.
Yeah, so Leah just did the percentages for the first round of votes. Oh my God, there's more coming. People are this is very exciting.
All right, I'm closing the poll. Oops. Leah, is there a way to get the results back? Oh.
Hold on just one moment, Rick. I'm here.
Okay.
Let me close that back before, hold on a second. Close, that one doesn't count. Let me go back to the original one. The final count was, oh goodness.
Do we have to declare a draw?
Hang on one moment.
I think the original percentage was 54%, no 47%. And by my math, which is very likely not right, we're looking now at 57% to 39%. But there's a lot of people who are perhaps better at this than I. Does that sound right?
I think that looks about right.
Oh wait, hold on. Ah!
Sorry, folks. As we mentioned earlier, this is our first time doing this as a webinar, so we're working out some of these bugs as we go. The next one will be smoother.
Yeah, so I've got 57% yes to 42%, 43%-ish no.
The opening?
For the closing.
Closing.
Yes,
So
that's the right percentage. And then the opening poll was 54% yes, 45% no.
All right, so it looks like Sarah's argument in favor of the proposition slightly edged out Anne's argument against the proposition. So congratulations on a debate well waged to both of our presenters. Good job, Anne and Sara. Thanks to all of you who attended. Thanks for submitting questions. And we will look forward, hopefully, to seeing you at another debate in the future.
Yep.
And with that, Leah, is there anything else we need to say before we close?
No, I just wanted to reiterate the thanks to you and Anne and Sara. It was a great debate. Thanks again for all your hard work on it. We are recording this webinar and we're going to make it available on the Charleston Conference website, and we'll email a link to everyone who registered. So you can, if you had to come in the middle or if you missed part of it, we'll provide that recording to you. So thanks again, everybody, and have a great rest of your day.
Yeah.
Thanks again.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Have a good day. Bye.